Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Healthy Rebel Speaks Out, where we really dive into some major tips so that you can feel empowered to take care of your health. And today is no different, and I am very, very excited to introduce our guest today, Dr. Diane Mueller, who is a seasoned sexual wellness authority who combines a strong educational foundation with clinical and teaching experiences. Has a dual doctorate in naturopath medicine, acupuncture, and Oriental medicine. Well, I want to introduce Dr. Mueller right now. So welcome to our show for the second time. I'm so grateful you are here.
Bonnie, I'm so glad to be here. I just love our conversations, both online and offline. So, we're going to have a great time today, and we're going to bust down some myths and talk about some trends and really, break through some of the taboos around sexuality and sexual health. So, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think this is such an important conversation that people are not having. But first, briefly, if you wouldn't mind, if you could explain what got you interested in this particular area.
So many things. Just like I feel like in functional medicine and in health, there's like so many root causes, right? And it's like so many different things are actually the cause of our sexual dysfunction. Anything from testosterone to blood sugar to relationships to safety to confidence, on and on and on. Well, the same thing with my journey, right? So I tell different stories about the why. And so some of it was just through my own upbringing and raised really conservative and felt in many ways like I didn't have resources for learning about sex and sexuality. I didn't know what was healthy. I didn't know how relationships were supposed to be healthy or not healthy from a sexuality standpoint. And another component, a huge component for me, is one of my core values. One of my top core values is connection. And divorce rates are on the rise. And I'm divorced myself. And, all of that really brings to me this whole question of like, sometimes we're really not right for each other in relationships. So sometimes divorce is the right thing for people. But oftentimes it's just falling out of love, falling out of connection. And since connection is my core value, one of my top core values, that really has gotten me interested over the past several decades of what actually drives human connection. And when it comes to sexuality and when it comes to intimacy and libido, we see that the couples that report the happiest actually are engaged intimately at least 50 times a year. So basically once a week. And so many couples are not making time for that anymore. I know, towards the end of several of my relationships, that's what it has happened. So that really has led me to, to study a lot, both from a standpoint of physical, root causes, but also like, what is the research saying around connectivity? What is the research saying around how we communicate better, around how we express intimately and these sorts of things? So, the top reason I would say, if I'm going to boil it down to a nutshell, it comes down to my core value around connection.
Well, I love this, and I cannot think, currently that this is a more important topic. I mean, especially during COVID when we became so isolated. And so I feel in our modern world, it's not as natural, right? And I feel like we're given so many messages, particularly around like lust and sex and excitement, that that's what it's supposed to feel like in a relationship. And obviously, I mean, because having had been single for a bit, I will admit, to me, if it lasts more than 2 months, because that's when the excitement ends, let's face it, then maybe you got a chance.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's like we see so much of how I feel like intimacy and love is portrayed as like in movies or even pornography. And it's like this hot, heavy passion thing that like you don't have to schedule, you just like show up and everybody is just so turned on. And yes, that's the beginning, that's those hormones. And also there's a level of like that is also fantasy, right? That is also, it's like I had somebody that actually owns a sexual vibrator store that has doing a ton of research on utilizing these sexual massagers for healing pelvic pain, all sorts of different sexual dysfunction. So really, really cool company. And he said something to me that was really amazing. His owner of Mystery Vibe. And he said to me, when people watch porn and think that this is, or when people watch movies and think that this is what sex and intimacy is like, it's almost like watching Superman and all of a sudden getting done and being like, oh, I can fly. Right. It's like, right. It's like these things are designed for entertainment. And
Right, and
because
you
we're not
feel
actually,
bad. Like
yeah.
you feel bad, like maybe I'm doing something wrong, like this isn't right. Like I'm supposed to be feeling excitement before anything happens.
Absolutely. And that's like the vicious cycle that I think we get into sexual, from a sexual intimacy standpoint around self-shame and blame. And we either blame ourselves or we self-shame or we think our partner's doing something wrong. And that creates distance, especially because even though we've come so far, I feel like with biohacking and lifestyle and functional medicine and really getting to the root cause of disease, while it's like normal to talk about sleep hygiene and our poop and like all these different things, it's still not normal to talk about sex. And this is such a
Hmm.
cornerstone of health. It's such a
And
cornerstone of relationships.
well,
And yet we're
it
not
kind of
talking.
perpetuates the species, don't you think? I mean,
Yes,
when we think about all the taboos over the centuries relative to sex, it is kind of cuckoo when you think we wouldn't be here if nobody did it.
right. Exactly. Exactly.
So
It's like
you're
so
speaking.
soulful.
Right. So you're definitely, of course, you're speaking to a lot of the psychological things that have been going on. But clearly, maybe we could also talk about, in addition to that, what has happened over the past decades relative to testosterone, fertility, and other things that we have to deal with now that is also influencing this important, very important part of our life.
Yeah, testosterone's a really good point and a really important thing to talk about because testosterone, the trends around testosterone are that testosterone has actually declined about 45% in the past 40 years, right? And what keeps happening as testosterone levels decline in humans is we just change the reference range of the lab. So as like we just keep saying, oh, the normal is actually a little bit lower. And then the we see that testosterone declines and then we change the normal to a little bit lower. So we still have the same amount of people in a normal range, but we just keep changing the range. And so people don't realize that they are severely lacking in testosterone, that's affecting their libido, that's affecting their muscle growth, that's affecting their vitality, so many different things. And people don't realize that there's a problem here because we're told we're normal when it's like, well, normal is actually maybe 45% lower than it used to be.
Well, that is crazy. So
Yeah.
what do you think is influencing that? I mean, I can definitely speak to the just our environment and all the endocrine disruptors. Not
Yeah,
to
endocrine
mention
disruptor.
statin therapy as well. People don't appreciate perhaps that cholesterol is a precursor to these essential hormones, that this could be influencing it.
Absolutely. And we would be, I think, not doing our proper job here if we didn't actually also mention insulin and
Hmm.
blood sugar. So we see blood sugar and with our obesity and diabetes rates on the rise, that can really influence testosterone. Certainly, statins and the change of those precursors could potentially do that. Yes, the endocrine disruptors, we definitely have to mention stress and cortisol and thyroid. All of those types of hormones can also influence things. Even over exercising, like exercising will actually raise testosterone levels, especially if we're doing something like a high intensity interval workout, lifting weights, that will raise testosterone, but potentially long cardiovascular workouts can potentially lower testosterone. So it's not saying like, okay, we shouldn't ever enjoy a good bike ride or a run or those sorts of things. But a lot of times when people are overtraining that way, that's actually creating so much cortisol in the body that can actually lead to testosterone problems as well. So, and then all those things being said, I always like to mention when we're talking about testosterone, that testosterone is, of course, not the only physical thing, because so many times people will get put on TRT, like testosterone replacement therapy. And for a certain portion of population, it's like life-changing for their libido. But for another portion of the population, it's like, well, that did not do anything, because even if testosterone may have needed to be improved, like I said at the beginning, and like I know you do in your work, there's so many root causes that are often causing the libido issue.
Right. Well, to me, a big thing with giving someone testosterone who is not metabolically healthy, I don't know if people are aware of something that you can speak to about aromatase and what can happen to that testosterone. I think that could be something that might be important for people to hear. If someone is
Yeah.
obese.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, a couple enzymes that actually can change testosterone and the way testosterone is metabolized and converted in our body. And one is aromatase, and essentially converting testosterone to estrogen. And another that we need to talk about is 5-alpha reductase, which is converting testosterone into its potent form. So basically, we have two main forms of testosterone, right? So we have the more potent testosterone known as DHT, and then we have a lesser potent testosterone. And so any of these areas where it's like, oh, we have an aromatase issue and we're hyper converting testosterone to estrogen, or we have an issue where we don't have, say, for example, enough of 5-alpha reductase. When we don't have enough 5-alpha reductase, what winds up happening is people are making not enough of that strong testosterone. Now, oftentimes with things like prostate hyperplasia in men, we're talking about too much of that strong testosterone. But we can also have situations where we don't have enough, where we don't have enough of that testosterone, that strong testosterone, and that could potentially impact libido as well.
Not to mention, I'm just going to say this, man boobs.
Yes.
Well, I think it's
Exactly.
something everyone understands and it gets people's attention. And certainly we're seeing it even in young boys. And again, that is for a different reason. But again, these endocrine disruptors that are in our environment that are, the extra estrogen. So yeah, man boobs. And then, yeah, fertility rates. This has gotten crazy.
Yeah.
They say sperm counts have dropped by more than 50%, and just in the last few decades.
Yeah, and there's probably more factors that are influencing that than we even realize. But I
Mhm.
certainly know that things that are, we're talking about, like endocrine disruptors, can be a huge thing. Testosterone levels can be a huge thing, right? So any toxins that are coming into our body, not any, but a lot of the toxins that come into our body do have that impact on our hormonal system, on our sperm quality. Because even when we're talking about, okay, we're talking about the count, when we're saying the number, right? So the count's falling, but then there's also problems that we're seeing with motility, with the quality. So it's, there's so many more factors even than just that count, of course. And and the same, a similar thing goes for women. I had a patient this week who sends me her ultrasound, and she's like, I was told this was normal. She's like, I was told that I have no problem. Well, she has follicles all over her ovaries that were found in the ultrasound. She has signs of insulin resistance. She has all of these hormones out of whack. Like when I look at it, I'm like, this looks like this could be, very clearly, very likely like a PCOS situation.
Mhm.
And she's just basically told that she's normal. And so this is what's happening all the time, right? Is like, if it's not bad enough, then people get kind of in this category of like, well, you're not sick enough, so we're just going to say you're fine. And it's actually like just like not sick enough to get a label, but it's still causing all the same levels of dysfunction.
Yeah, no, it's very hard. I went through my own fertility issues with PCOS. But you brought up another good point that, at the time, and this is going back 25 years, they really focused on the woman as it being her fault, kind of, as looking for it. But we realize now, with the sperm issues going on and the quality, that it's just as important for the men to be checked out too. And I feel it's so, so new. with all of these issues going on with the PCOS, that there seems to be like a gap in the healthcare of addressing these issues of these especially the young women like the person that came to see you.
Yeah, yeah, she's in her 30s, right? So, like very, very young to have these sorts of things happening. And I do think in general, like I think the gap that we're seeing here in part is coming from changing normal. As we get to be a sicker and sicker population, we just have this medical paradigm, right? That normal, that we have to have a certain population, part of the population in this normal range. And it doesn't matter if like people are getting sicker and sicker. We're like the way that the ranges are set up, we're saying that 95% of the population is normal. So if we get sicker and sicker, what normal actually changes to is a sicker and less functional individual. And so we're not really looking to say, okay, well, let's actually define normal by people that feel really healthy. And if we define that, I think we'd find probably at this point more people that are actually not functioning well and not functioning at full capacity, or even partial full capacity, than we'd have, people that were actually feeling well.
Yeah, no, that you bring up such a great point because I'm always talking about the dietary guidelines, which are made for quote unquote the healthy population. But according to the latest numbers, I think about it's like 6%, something like that, is considered to be metabolically healthy.
Yeah.
So I always say we don't want to be normal, we want to be exceptional,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I try to differentiate between like normal and common as well as the way I tend to do it around.
Yes,
Okay,
right.
right? Just to be because this is common, just because it's not in like your example, like 94% of the population is like you. If we only have 6% that's metabolically healthy. So if you're in that 94%, what's happening to you is common, but it doesn't mean that like this is your body functioning normally and well and healthy.
Exactly. So now, getting back to the main topic here, sex and what has happened over the last decades, would you agree? I mean, less and less people are doing it less frequently compared to 20, 30 years ago. Like this, like all the other stuff that we talked about, the testosterone and just I think our metabolic health, this is really affecting this part of our life. That and sexual dysfunction too.
It is. And I think part of the problem is we get into this vicious cycle. And I feel like almost all of medicine has various vicious cycles. Like I really kind of get obsessed about talking about the vicious cycle because oftentimes I think we're looking for the root and really it's like this more like this chicken and egg. So the vicious cycle that I'm speaking to here is in relationship to what you just brought up around like, okay, well, we are engaged intimately less now than we used to be. And the vicious cycle is we're so stressed out, our hormones are out of balance, we don't feel good. When we don't feel good, we don't feel confident in our body, all these different things. And then oftentimes it's like, I don't have time, effort, energy, or desire to be touched or to have a intimate relationship. Well, the problem with that is we actually see that what's happening with when we are intimate is, and why I think this is a fundamental keystone of health, is when we're intimate, we actually see oxytocin levels go up. And oxytocin, yeah, it's the love hormone, it's the cuddle hormone, but it regulates our stress hormone, it regulates our serotonin, it regulates our mood. There's so many different things that it'll actually regulate. It's this upper level regulatory hormone. It even has potential to even regulate weight. And yet we're in the vicious cycle. It's like, well, we don't get the oxytocin because we're too stressed out, but then we're not using the oxytocin to lower our stress. And then we're so stressed out because we're not getting the oxytocin that we're not engaged and yada, yada, yada. The cycle continues. So that's one of the problems I see that we're in is like, okay, how do we actually break this chicken and egg cycle?
Right, and there's just so many things I feel going on in our environment, and it's obviously diet is big, but let's face it, the cell phone, right? There's this technology. It's like some people can reach us now, 24/7, and I can't imagine how this is impacting this part of people's lives when you're taking your phone in bed with you, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another big thing is like not understanding the difference of the cycle of arousal with females and men. So absolutely what you're mentioning, like the stress, the overwhelm, all these different things. But then to complicate it, we are often taught that as women, we function from an arousal standpoint the same way as men. And so there's this misunderstanding, I think, bidirectionality in the culture. I was actually in a conversation with my boyfriend around like, okay, if you could change one thing about the masculine, we could change one thing about the feminine, what would it be? And his answer was he would like if women's arousal cycle was like closer to the masculine because it like would make sense, right? But the truth of it is it's not. And
Well, maybe
the
you could explain what that is a little bit. I'd like to hear because I'm not sure I really know what the different cycles are. I know, some of the stereotypical ideas around men and sex versus women. So yeah, if you could explain this a bit, I would love it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So the model I'm talking about was created by Rosemary Basson, and I think is the best model that we have. And I think it's so accurate and women I talk to in my own experience. So the male model of arousal is what most of us think of. It's like that excitation, that build, that climax, that release, right? So it's super linear. And that makes sense. Even, if we look at men, like their bodies are linear, and as women, we're curvy. And interestingly enough, the female cycle of arousal more is similar to the curviness of the female body. It's nonlinear, it's more of a circle. So, one of the biggest things to understand about the female cycle of arousal is one of the things that actually is really, really huge for leading to that excitation phase is actually starting to become intimate. So for men, what we see is the arousal oftentimes is first. It's like, oh, there's that visual cue. All of a sudden, the blood flows to the genitals. There's an erection, they're aroused. It can happen very, very, very quickly. For females, oftentimes it is 20 minutes into being intimate. And that's actually when we get the circulation moving enough. We get the circulation moving to our genitals. There we get the chemical change in our body. So it's almost like it takes being intimate to actually be aroused. And so that's one of the reasons for women it can be this thing that it's like, okay, well, I'm not in the mood. I'm so tired and like yada yada. Then you decide to do it. And then afterwards, sometimes there's this feeling of like, oh, I'm so glad we did that. That was really great. Why don't we do that more often? Right. And that's often because, like, well, we have to get through that initial thing because we don't have that same tendency most of the time. This is, everybody is different, right? So this is stereotypical
Sure.
feminine arousal, right? And then the other component of it that makes the circle, like if we were to pull up Rosemary Basson's image, it really is a circle and all these things come into it. So it's like, stress comes into it. It's how we're talked to comes into it, safety, how we're feeling about our body. Did we work out? Like all these different things can actually play into it. And it's more like this circle that it builds, it builds, it builds, it builds more of this linear thing that happens to the masculine. And I think one of the reasons it's important to bring up, not only for females to hear, but because we're taught this and because when we watch images and media and these sorts of things, and it always looks like this masculine arousal, like the two people see each other and it's hot and heavy. And yes, in the beginning with women, we do have more of a tendency to operate that way because we have additional chemicals going on. But when those novelty chemicals wear off, then we're more in our normal feminine cycle and we're not shown that. So oftentimes men, they can, sometimes feel hurt, right? If we don't understand this and we approach a woman and they're not, we approach our lover, our partner, and it's like, wow, I'm not getting that response. Well, it's because it takes us longer. And neither partner, if from the feminine, masculine, hetero relationship, neither partner is taught this. So oftentimes there's just this miss. And oftentimes there's this sense of let down or of just feeling bad, right? Of almost dismissal or rejection that can happen.
Rejection, that's the
Yeah,
word. That's
thank
the
you.
word I was thinking of, that would
Yes,
be huge. And also, I think what you're speaking to me, which is often forgotten, is that it really begins in the head. I mean, certainly these low testosterone levels, I understand, but honestly, this is your most powerful sexual organ, I think that there is. Would you agree with
great. And that's why I also look at like sexuality, intimacy. This is a mindfulness based activity. And I say that because if we have like it's another thing that we know about men versus women, and I really like the work of Allison Armstrong because she goes through this so well on the way hormones and blood flows differently to testosterone dominant brains versus estrogen dominant brains.
Interesting.
And yeah, she's amazing. She's so amazing at describing this. I can't recommend her work. And she has a book called The Queen's Code that's just phenomenal at bringing so much light to this. And in that, she talks a lot about how men, because of the way blood flows through their brain, are so focused, right? And that's what's actually happening. It's like, and it's the classic example that I love is like if man is in man zone and he's watching TV, then and you try to talk to him and it's like, hey, honey, 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 right? And that's
Yes.
because the focus is so good, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for sex, right? Like there is much more of an ease because of the way blood flows to their brain for men to
Hmm.
focus on exactly what's happening. Females, blood flows to our brain differently. That's why we can, walk into a room and like the way Allison would describe it is like the room speaks and it's like, oh my gosh, that pillow's out of place. Oh my gosh, there's stuff in the sink. Oh my, like, and we see all the things that need to be attended to because our brain it doesn't compartmentalize in the same way and the blood flows. Well, the same thing goes for sex, right? So it's like, the moments that we are engaged intimately, it is a meditation type of practice. It's a mindfulness type of practice to say, I'm going to stay so present on the sensations of the moment. And that's how we enjoy pleasure. Pleasure in many ways is like the ability to be present in the moment. And I think we're not taught that. I think it's like so easy for it's like the mind not to stay focused. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I should be sleeping or I need to do this thing or I need to do that thing versus like, hey, this is actually a stress-based reduction technique. Sex is, intimacy is, and we're going to really practice just like we were doing visualization, just like we were doing a different mindfulness-based stress reduction. So, we can bring our mindfulness based type of activities to the bedroom with our lover.
Yeah, well, again, I think this speaks to your number one goal about connection, and I think about the motivation of anyone wanting to do anything, not just sex, but other things that people seek out for enjoyment is why, right? They think it's going to make them happy.
Yes.
And ultimately, I mean, what is more important than your intimate relationships, really?
Exactly. Exactly. It really is the number one, important thing, I think. And it's like that's why we're here is to connect with people we love. And if we don't put time into that, then the connection so often fades.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this definitely, maybe you could speak to how this really does impact all areas of your life, whether it be just in general, of course, hormones, which affects our health, cardiovascular disease, mental health, obviously, but also really, really important, our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves when we feel like we're not wanted.
Yeah, I really break down the why behind low libido into three main tiers or three main pillars, we could say. So we have the physical pillar, we have the personal pillar, and then we have the interpersonal pillar. And all of these can be impactful not only of our libido and our sexual health, but everything, of course, is integrated into our lives, like you're saying. So if we're breaking down the physical side of things, that's why I have my libido quiz at libidoquiz.com to go through these. We're saying that we have hormones, we're saying that we have stress, we have cardiovascular, we have neurological. So those are some of the top. And then we, of course, have more like inflammatory type of causes as well, toxins and those sorts of things. So those are some of the top physical root causes. Now, when we get into the personal side of things, that's where I feel like we get to some of the confidence. And the confidence here, there's many different types of confidence. And one, of course, we do what's really interesting is we do see there's another vicious cycle around confidence in body image or even confidence in genital image. It's another thing that's been studied because so many, people, it's like the only time if they have seen somebody else's body, it's in a movie, right? It's in something. And not only is like the body supposed to quote unquote look a certain way. Obviously, I don't agree with that, but not only do the movies portray that, if there is a movie that is more X-rated, where you do see more full disclosure, then it's also like a one version of what our genital anatomy is supposed to look like, right? And so it's been studied that oftentimes people feel like not only about do the way that their body looks, but the way that their genitals look makes a big impact on them being comfortable showing up into the bedroom. But what's interesting is then the more we engage intimately, there's also this result that when we are intimately engaged, we do have confidence go up. We do have body image go up. We do have genital image goes up. So it's another vicious cycle. So it's one of these things where it's like, that's why I like educating on this, because yeah, we want to, work on the mental, emotional, physical things that are impacting confidence. And one of my favorite things that I think can be really powerful, and there's a few of us in the field talking about it, is this like a erotic or radical orgasm type of scenario. And what this means, and you don't have to do this all the way to orgasm. So if you're somebody that has not orgasmed, can totally still work for you. But we can work because our brains are in these really heightened states, right? So our brains are in these amazing states where they're basically, when we're very, very in that moment, our brains are very impressionable. It's like we can make these hypnotic suggestions. So when it comes to confidence, if we can actually be safe enough, and of course we have to have the right partner to do this, but if we can be safe enough to say like, hey, I'm really not feeling confident about my thighs today. Can you, tell me in the middle of love making, like just like how gorgeous I am and how gorgeous my thighs are. When we're in that hypnotic state and we have our partner whisper things into our ear, the suggestions, I've been brought to tears by this exercise. I have clients been brought to tears by this exercise because our partner is helping us to re-pattern those beliefs basically when we are so suggestible. So it's like, it's really cool when we actually start to use those intimate moments that way, because we can actually use intimacy to heal each other by repatterning our beliefs, and confidence is, certainly one belief we can do there.
Wow, that is really powerful. I love that suggestion because I can totally see how this can impact people to, yes, eat better, exercise, and do other activities. I mean, it's very common, obviously, when someone picks up a new relationship, the next thing you know, they're going to the gym and they're doing all kinds of things. But what if we could just do this for each other for the long term, and how much more meaningful that would be. And this is so great because unfortunately, no one talks about this. No
Yeah.
one discusses this really with their doctors. They just say it's not working. I mean, I don't know, I'm not in there, but I've
Yeah.
seen it on the charts. But I think that's as far as the conversation goes, right?
Yes, I definitely agree. I mean, the biggest thing that I think comes up in the medical community is like, okay, well, we can do some TRT or even full HRT and get people on hormones. And yeah, I mean, if that can work amazingly, if that is actually the problem. But so much of the time, it's like, it's not the problem, or it's only a part of the problem. It's like we can give all of the hormone replacement therapy we want. And I'm a fan of HRT, right? I think it's amazing. I think there's like so many good reasons for a lot of people to be utilizing that. And what should be happening is like, well, let's do that and let's actually talk about all these other things. It's like in every other area of health, we talk about like the mind influence and all these other influences, right? So it's like, oh, somebody is not eating well. And it's like, well, let's train them, let's teach them, let's talk about food and nutrition. And let's also talk about like, what are the mindset habits? What are the habits? What's happening at the grocery store? What's happening from that mindset, almost addiction standpoint that maybe is causing us to gravitate towards fast food or bad oils or whatever it is. And when it comes to sexuality, it's like, okay, well, good luck with the hormone replacement therapy, but we're not talking about actually the power of the mind. And like I said, in this like more radical orgasmic, situation, or even say radical intimacy, because like I said, it doesn't have to be orgasm. I think it's just such a cool way of actually working together to heal our wounds, our beliefs, our traumas. All these other things are possible in the right scenario with the right conversations.
Yeah, and I think just encouraging people to even just kiss
Yeah.
and hold each other. It doesn't always have to be the destination or, the final act, I guess. It's the little stuff. And maybe that's where women are different too. I mean, I think even texting something playful during the day, that could be a little foreplay.
I'm so glad you bring this up, Bonnie, because it's the fourth conversation I think is so important because foreplay, I think, has gotten a really bad reputation for what it is. Like foreplay, I think now we're like thinking like, oh, it's like what we do like 5 or 10 minutes before we start actually, moving towards the big act, right? And foreplay in couples that have really successful long-term intimacy, foreplay actually begins the moment sex ends. And I don't want anybody to hear this and be like, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm so busy.
A lot of pressure.
Right? It's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of work. Like that's not what I'm saying. But the little things we do, like, like sending that cute set text, sending that flirtatious text during the day. And then if we get a text, the most important thing is like, these are areas where our partner is trying, we don't want to feel rejected, right? So if we receive a flirty text and either we don't respond or we respond with like, thanks, or we respond with just like a kissy face or something that doesn't feel like we're truly engaged back, then usually that can feel like rejection or the person being like, well, that's like flat tire. That didn't go very far. So it's like, it does not actually take a lot of energy. It's like when I'm working on helping people with various things like moving their lymph, it's like I will tell them like just do 30 to 60 seconds a day on your neck. It can really make a big difference. Same sort of things with this. It's like, yeah, we want that foreplay to start as soon as that intimacy ends, but it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It's just more around showing up in these little ways, these little few things that truly only take a few seconds, but just beginning to create those small habits to let that energy build again in our relationships.
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I just think about our society now where frequently, both spouses are working, they could have kids, they're driving all over the place, pressures, and they have 5 seconds to be intimate together. And how can we like overcome this obstacle? And how long does it take to send a cute text, or even when you're with someone, just telling them how you appreciate them, you're excited to be with them? How long does that take?
Exactly. And I
But it means everything. It means everything.
really can light up that whole thing and it can really reignite that spark. These little things actually can go a huge long way, especially if you haven't been intimate with your partner in a while. It can start to rev up that engine, right? Because this is a muscle like anything else. And sometimes, especially for women, when we don't practice this muscle, it can almost feel like it goes dormant. Like I've had, friends and people I've worked with when it's like, okay, I'm ready to date again, and they haven't been intimate in a while, actually go out and like go buy a new vibrator. And that works for some people. It's against some people's beliefs. It doesn't, that's not the point. The point is like, hey, we actually work the muscle oftentimes by engaging that muscle. And the other thing I want to add on that is I really think the work by James Clear on atomic habits is super important to mention here because we're talking about a new thing, right? If we're talking about, okay, I'm going to work to, really put effort into sending my partner a text or two that is cute, that is flirtatious, that is complimentary once a day, right? Takes 5 seconds. But the biggest thing is in the busyness of the day, how are you going to remember how to do that? So, the work of James Clear, what I like on his atomic habits at work is like, okay, well, we have to go down to the micro habit. So the micro habit is actually like in part about having that cue, that reminder. So if it's a new thing, it's like if we're going to go to the gym, for example, and we're going to get a new gym habit. Let's say we've been out of exercise for a while. We're going to have a plan most of the time. We're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to go at 6 o'clock on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, or whatever it is, right? There's going to be a plan. So same thing, like, okay, when is the most important time, easiest time of your day to do this? If you're super busy, set an alarm on your phone. If it's like, oh, I know I'm waiting in the school pickup line at 2:50 every day for my kids. Okay, that's probably a moment that I might actually have a second. So I'm going to have an alarm on my phone at 2:50 because I know I'm likely going to be able to attend to it in that moment. And that's going to be my trigger to, hey, I'm going to take a moment to do this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would like to know what you would speak to the women, and I know quite a few of them, who just say, I don't care anymore. Not
Yeah.
interested. It never happens again. I am fine.
Yeah.
What
I mean,
what do you say to those people? Because I mean, what I always say is, listen, if you want to keep doing it, you got to keep doing it.
yeah,
That's kind of my advice, but
that's like
I've
right. I mean,
already
you lose it or use it or you lose it. And what I'd say is this is like the statistics on people that are having on couples that are saying reporting the most happiness in their relationships and 50 times a year of intimacy almost once a week. That of course is a statistic, right? That of course is not everybody. And can
sure.
people have a lot less intimacy and be happy and all of that? Sure. The question I have for self-pondering for people and particularly women that when this comes up is this. Do you feel like you could have more self-confidence? Do you feel like you would like a free way of managing your stress hormones, of helping you to have more happiness that doesn't involve a new supplement, that doesn't involve a pharmaceutical? Do you feel like your relationships could improve? Are you interested in anti-aging? Are you interested in pelvic floor health and preventing incontinence and all these pelvic pain, these things that happen with aging? And if you are answering yes to these questions, it probably is worth it to engage in starting an intimate life again, because oftentimes we think of it as like, okay, well, I just don't care, like sex isn't important to me, but we're not asking the right question many a time. And so if we're saying like we would like oxytocin, we want our stress to be reduced, we don't want another pharmaceutical, another supplement, we want our relationships to be better, we want to have healthy pelvic health so we don't have incontinence, then probably is worth actually re-examining this from a different way. And remember that cycle of arousal is oftentimes we think like, well, we're not interested because we're not really aroused and who cares? But then we realize all the health benefits. If we're oriented to health, there might be reasons to come back and actually start looking at this again.
But also, again, going back to your number one goal here, which I could not agree with more, it's the connection too with your spouse. It's like you're not just buddies going through this as best friends living together. I mean, there is like a unique bond there, I would suggest. I mean, obviously, sometimes there are issues where people can't, but I would also think you could be creative and still come up with other ways to connect with each other in this way, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I think, for most humans, and that's why I like to pose the answer in the form of a question, because for most humans, I think having that level of connection with their partner is a high value. And some people, they're really good with just being buddies, and that feels like a good relationship to them. And if that's the case, this might not be the information for you, but I do really think that most people, when it comes down to it, really the majority do want that high level of connection that has fallen away and would love to get some of that back and be more than just, buddies and pals. So this is certainly a really important component of it. And like I said, there's so much healing that can happen from the mind. And so many of us have micro traumas throughout our life, right? Some major traumas, but we constantly have micro traumas. It's like part of humans is we get hurt, our egos get hurt, our feelings get hurt. It just happens. And what an amazing ability to help each other heal from this, and using, that radical intimacy for that. It's another way of helping to bring us, each other closer, is actually helping our partner heal. So there's so much that it provides, I think, bi-directionally. And we just think oftentimes it's like just about that intimate act. No, it's
Right.
about everything that we get because we did that.
So it's much more than procreation, is what you're saying.
Correct.
So what advice would you give to someone who maybe they very rarely have relations with their spouse? or it's been years even, like what would be the first step perhaps they could think about doing to get them in the direction?
I would say the first step depends in part behind, on whatever the intimacy is, like where you're at. Meaning, like, are you at a point where it's like, okay, well, you haven't been sexually intimate, but you're still hugging and kissing and touching and those sorts of things. That's going to be different than somebody that's like, okay, well, we basically, pet, kiss, goodbye, and hello, and that's like largely all we touch. And so if you're in the point where it's like, okay, there's not a lot of touching happening there, and it really is just these like pet kisses, and you really truly are more in that buddy, role, I would definitely say, an easy place from ripping the band-aid off standpoint is schedule intimacy dates where you guys are actually just touching more, just starting with the holding hands again, maybe sitting on the same side of the table of dinner. So, you're holding hands or your legs are touching more, playing footsie at dinner, just engage in those kind of things. And, scheduling these types of things is always a fun or often a funny thing for people, but what's interesting about that, right, is we think that we're not supposed to schedule intimacy. It's so like, oh, this should just be spontaneous. But in the beginning, when we're dating and things are like in that novelty phase, it was actually always scheduled. You scheduled your dates. You knew that, okay, well, Friday night you had your date and you're going to see your new person and you got, gussied up and like, had that anticipatory thing. So what's interesting is once we move in together and have these longer term relationships, we actually think that we're not supposed to schedule because we see each other all the time. But what we've been doing successfully the entire time is actually scheduling it. So, I think starting to schedule those intimacy things is like, it's really important. And wherever you're at, I would just say a easy place is just like, push that next level of comfort. If you do, embrace longer already and actually do kiss more passionately, but never, go past that, then take it to the bedroom and don't have an end goal. It's like you said earlier, it's not really the end goal. It's like that destination. So take it to the bedroom and sit and just like have the intention, like, okay, we're going to explore each other's bodies again. And if it's awkward and feels awkward, name it and be like, hey, are you feeling awkward? And like, you can giggle and you can laugh and you can joke about it and you can just, make it into like this thing that when you name, if it's feeling awkward and you name it and you kind of joke about it, kind of takes the weirdness out of it and it can actually dissolve some of that awkward feeling as well.
Yeah, and I also would add to that that to tell someone what you want, because people aren't mind readers in the relationship either. And just that you want to be held or kissed or something simple, whatever it is, just to express it, right? And not assume that someone knows what it is that you are wanting to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's something else that we didn't talk about today yet is having the right kind of sex. And I think so many times when people say, oh, I'm not interested in it, what they're not interested in is having the wrong kind of sex. And by right versus wrong, it's what I mean is what is right for the uniqueness of your pleasure body. And it's again, I think some of the taboo that we have in
Mhm.
our society, right? Around like, oh, this is what intimacy is supposed to look like. We do this, we do this, we do this. And then even in relationships, we can get into these intimacy ruts where it's like we do this and then we do this and it's like this like chain of events and then it's over and that's just how we, make love. That's how we're intimate. And may have been doing this our whole life without ever actually understanding what our pleasure body is and what our pleasure body wants. And so some of that is starting to be more honest with ourselves in part around like, oh yeah, this feels good. That doesn't feel good. That, was done too long. That was done not enough. And we really need to start with understanding our own selves and our own pleasure bodies and being okay and being more than okay if it doesn't look like anything we've seen in the movies, right? Because we're unique in every other area of health. Why would we not be unique in our pleasure body? And then once we understand it, then having the ability to safely communicate to our partner about this, about like what our pleasure body is. And there's a lot to be said. And that's more in like the interpersonal pillar that we didn't get into around like, okay, well, how do we begin to communicate with our partner around our pleasure bodies, wants and needs and preferences and desires, as well as dislikes?
Yeah, I feel like this is you really shed light on a major gap in healthcare. And because I'm sure, I mean, at least for most of us, I believe, the only thing sex was ever talked about was in relationship to the point of procreation, and never about having sex just for the point of connection, pleasure. And there's obviously a reason we're made this way. Like we're meant to do this just for the pleasure of it, okay? Not just for, with a goal in mind. Um, so I guess I'd love to hear your view of like the future and what in your mind you would love to see change just on like the big society, healthcare, that could really support this.
Yeah, I really feel like it comes down to the way we're even starting to educate in schools. And it's a tricky thing, right? Because we want to educate in a way where it's like we're making sure that we are helping kids that are not mature yet understand how adults this thing, this act is, as well as making sure we're preventing STIs and making sure we're preventing unwanted pregnancies. And so it gets to be a little bit complicated, of course, about when is the right time to be talking and having this conversation. But at some point, I do feel we really need to have actually change what's happening in educating humans around this. Maybe teenage years. I'm not, it's truthfully, I'm not sure what would be the most appropriate age to start that, but some awareness of like, this is actually how female anatomy and arousal works. This is what masculine works. This is different. And then actually talking about the importance of this and what is it's providing from a health perspective, as well, of course, helping protect people and from like, okay, this is what's happening with attachment. This is what's happening if we're not operating in a way that's true to our own value system. This is, all the different things, right? There's so many different layers.
And taking the
And
shame away, like of
taking
that,
shame
because it's
away.
like normal when you're 13, 14, and you get those funny little feelings. I mean, I think it's normal, but we don't know what to do with it. And then another point I would mention is the cell phone again, because of that, and the accessibility to many, many images, videos, whatnot, that parents can't really control, that they can get the wrong messages about what this act is all about. So I actually would suggest even earlier, perhaps, that people that they get educated.
Yeah, it's perhaps a good idea. And I think it's a good suggestion just from the standpoint of it is very different with what we see on, with the social media and these sorts of things from a standpoint of people are getting information at earlier and earlier age. So needing to control that narrative or not control, needing to educate around like what is truth and what is not. And I think that's a
Mhm.
huge part of the taboo, right? Is like, how do we actually normalize and say this is normal, this is healthy? We do want to do this because there are risks. We do want to educate against the risk and help people stay safe and all of those things. But this is a normal thing. And having a healthy sex life has all of these benefits. So teaching kids what healthy sex life looks like, teaching when is a good age to actually engage this way. I think we're leaving it too much up to the media and to sex ed classes, which still, to my understanding and talking to the children in my life, are still largely so similar as to what was taught when I was in school, which was like all about just this like linear process. This like, this is what the anatomy is, this is what it does, this is what procreation is, and that's it. We haven't really branched out beyond procreation, and I think there's a huge need to.
I agree. Well, I think this is a very important discussion, and is there anything else that you would like to leave your audience? Of course, we're going to put in the link below. You have both the free quiz. It's called, say it again, what it is, the quiz?
Libidoquiz.com.
Libidoquiz.com. And then you have a free, is it a book or a handout, like a
Yeah,
book
it's
kind
look,
of thing?
I think it's about a 40-page book or
Oh,
so.
yeah.
So it's a small, quick read. It's called Revive Your Love Life. And we go through some of the things that we're talking about today in a lot more detail in that book.
Well, wonderful. And then, of course, we'll have all of your contact information if people want to know learn about more about what you do and how to work with you. But thank you so much today.
Thank
I
you, Bonnie. It's a pleasure. Bye, everybody.